first 100 days are going to be crucial in terms of foreign policy. The situation on the ground has changed. Trump's model of diplomacy is extremely personal. The positions of both parties are fairly entrenched. Ukraine is fighting for survival, not interested in territorial concessions, but rather in advancing its geopolitical goals in taking over Ukraine. In terms of the Middle East, too, the situation is more concerning. Iran has normalized relations with many of the Arab states. Iran seems to be a much more deciding factor in this relationship. I think once he realizes what he's dealing with, I think it will be difficult for him to simply claim that he can resolve those issues overnight. I think a lot will also depend on who he listens to within his administration right now.
There will now be a new administration in the United States of America. How does that change things with regards to the Israel-Hamas war and the situation in West Asia? To talk a little more on this, I'm being joined by Irina Tsukerman, who is a national security and human rights lawyer. She's also a fellow at the Arabian Peninsula Institute and a fellow at Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Irina, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global. It does seem like a lot of things are going to change because there is a change in administration in Washington, D.C. What do you anticipate is going to happen in the coming months?
Thank you so much. The first 100 days are going to be crucial in terms of foreign policy. President-elect Trump has emphasized his intention to settle the wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine. However, the first signs are showing that that may be more difficult than it appears. Russia immediately attacked Ukraine and denied even having a phone call with Trump regarding this issue. During the course of that call, Trump has asked the Kremlin to not escalate in Ukraine as his inauguration nears. He also expressed interest in two of the points from President Zelensky's victory plan, which was communicated to the Biden administration. In terms of the wars in the Middle East, they too are appearing more difficult to settle than what meets the eye. He had previously asked Israel to wrap up military operations in Gaza and Lebanon by the time of his inauguration, but his newly nominated officials all appear to be fairly hardline on Hamas, and they may be more supportive of extended operations should the issues in question not be resolved by that point, which means, of course, the release of hostages by Hamas, which remains a red line for Israel, as well as the cessation of attacks on Israel's northern borders by Hezbollah, which likewise has not ceased in the past months.
Right. Irina, you said the 100-day plan or the first 100 days would or could look difficult for President Trump in implementing the what he calls a peace plan or bringing about peace in West Asia. Why do you say that? Why do you think it's going to be difficult?
The situation on the ground has changed. Trump's model of diplomacy is extremely personal. It's focused, first of all, more on bilateral relations than multilateral frameworks, and second, on the role of personal relations such as his own or in the past Jared Kushner's with the officials and top-ranking leaders of countries. But I think during his first term in office, the situation on the ground was different. Russia and Ukraine were not embroiled in war for over 2 years, which means the positions of both parties are fairly entrenched. Ukraine is fighting for survival. It is an existential threat. Russia has, through its former president Medvedev, communicated that it is not interested in territorial concessions, but rather in advancing its geopolitical goals in taking over Ukraine. In terms of the Middle East, too, the situation is more concerning. Iran has normalized relations with many of the Arab states, which were part of the uh, prospective defense alliance against Iran during Trump's first term in office. Um, China is playing a far greater political and not just financial and economic role in the Middle East, and the internal dynamics in the Arab countries have also changed, particularly after October 7th. There is a sense of polarization and tensions between Israel and some of these countries, which complicates peace efforts and multilateral cooperation,
Very
and
interesting.
which will also make it difficult to use personal diplomacy to address these issues.
Very interesting points, but let's just focus on Netanyahu for a bit. There's staunch support that we've seen coming from President Trump when it comes to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Do you think that support will extend to the extent that you will see a lot more support and aid going to Israel without any explanation that was given earlier by the Democrats on humanitarian issues, humanitarian concerns, so on and so forth? Because Trump had made it very clear that whoever criticizes Israel is free to leave the United States of America. And if that policy, if he follows through on that policy, it seems like Netanyahu will finally get his way in how he wants to deal with Gaza and West Bank.
I disagree. First of all, Trump himself was the first to criticize Netanyahu personally and Israel's operations in general throughout his campaign. That said, I do think he will be more pragmatic in addressing security issues, which remain a major obstacle to effective delivery of humanitarian aid. And I do think that as someone who has had a history of more positive relations with the Arab countries, he would be more effective in creating political dialogue that could resolve these concerns diplomatically, rather than putting Israel in an isolated and defensive posture vis-a-vis the pressure from these countries. And I think in that sense, he could actually overcome some of the differences between the US and Israel, which we have seen under the Biden administration.
So you do think that Trump wields more influence and has has as greater a rapport with leaders such as from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the important countries in the Arab world, and is the reason why there could be an influence towards move to coming to the talking table and talking peace.
At the very least, there could be an opening. That said, there are still many complications that lie outside Trump's immediate control, which, as I mentioned, are changing political dynamics inside those countries, and the involvement of third party actors, which was not nearly as pronounced 4 years ago when Trump was leaving office. And I think those obstacles could make it difficult uh, um, to restore trust and rebuild relations with those countries, even though Trump's team is much more likely to have, on a personal level, better dynamic, and it may be coming in with more things to offer rather than with just pressure or threats, as the Biden administration started out with those states.
Right. Then, what is your reading on the normalization of ties that you mentioned between Iran and various countries? Particularly now, we're seeing meetings and conversations and engagement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which was first fostered or the mediator was China. So we are looking at maybe an isolation of the West in a scenario where things have complicated because of the United States of America.
Indeed, China has jumped on any vacuum of US absence in the region, and unfortunately, Trump has not helped in that respect. During his term in office, he virtually ignored China's growing economic activity in the region, instead pursuing parallel deals that were very transactional and did not cover any issues outside bilateral US Saudi relations. The Saudis also expressed disappointment after the U.S. failed to prevent or address the Aramco attacks that were Iran-backed during Trump's term in office, and China is being perceived, or at least presents itself, as a stabilizing force. It has maintained good relations with both Iran and Saudi Arabia. It has sold surveillance equipment to both countries and has been very engaged in energy and construction and contracting issues, creating a very strong presence on the ground. Uh, while U.S. presence has been decreasing not only militarily but in terms of businesses, a growing number of smaller businesses and contractors have left the country. There are many deals ongoing and many American companies traveling, but those are usually a small self-selected groups of top country companies that do not necessarily have a broad influence over the dynamics on in projects such as NEOM, which is a signature project of Saudi Arabia. Moreover, other countries in the region, such as UAE, have also been fostering closer relations with both China and Russia, which became a national security obstacle for defense cooperation over time. Trump will be hard pressed to address those issues effectively.
Right. When it comes to Saudi Arabia, what do you think is the reluctance? We do know that Saudi Arabia has massive investments right now in Neom city, which borders Israel, and that therefore they have been reluctant in having a full blown situation of war in West Asia, and is could be one of the reasons why they have been reluctant. Could you explain how important Neom city is for Saudi Arabia and why they've stayed away from directly getting involved in a conflict where what they say would really matter, because this is the Palestinian cause?
Well, yeah, there's a few things going on. From an economic perspective, of course, NEOM is hugely important to Saudis. It's billions, many billions worth of investments. It was supposed to be, however, an opportunity to bring countries closer together. This original concept developed at the peak of discussions about Abraham Accords, and Israelis were some of the who would have benefited from an opening that it presented. It would have drawn Israel and Arab Gulf states closer together in terms of project coordination. That opportunity seems to be shrinking, but NEOM's economic importance to Saudi Arabia is not. And it's been a signature project for them to attract investments and to push their economic model and the vision of 2030 to the international community, even though now it is no longer quite as Western oriented as when it first started, perhaps because it is now being by other people who are much closer to China than they are to the US.
Okay.
Uh, However, there are security concerns outside NEOM. Of course, the Houthis had previously attacked Saudi Arabia and UAE multiple times, and even recently, despite the fact that the Saudis have been engaged in peace talks with the Houthis for the past 2 years, there have been some incidents and attacks that they have had to respond to. Iran, too, has actually openly threatened Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region with potential attacks in the event they assisted Israel in any other ways. And of course, with Trump coming to office, there are concerns about managing these relationships. On the one hand, Saudi Arabia and Iran are benefiting from trade, or at least those who are involved in the trade are benefiting. I wouldn't say that the overall relations between those countries have improved greatly, but on an official level, they view it as beneficial because it's a source of financial income for a number of parties
Right.
involved in those engagements, and they're reluctant to back away from these commitments. Saudis also see it as a potential security guarantee, which is actually being leveraged very effectively by Iran. Iran seems to be a much more deciding factor in this relationship. Why? Why would that be the case when Iran is a militarily weaker country and Saudi Arabia is equipped with billions of dollars of top-notch U.S. Equipment? The reason being is that Iran has been extremely effective in penetrating societies beyond establishing purely military control through its proxies. It has in the past caused disorder in Saudi Arabia by aligning with the radical factions, and it has formed also relationships with assorted Islamist groups, which can be reignited at any moment. So
That's
this relationship with Iran is a sort of bear hug, which has its advantages for the few, but for the most part, it is not necessarily a good sign for Saudi Arabia and its role in the region.
That's a very, very interesting take, Irina. Not many people understand the layers and intricacies into as to why Saudi Arabia is behaving or acting in the manner in which it is, and the Iran factor over here. Having said that, you also said that Trump was one of the first to criticize Israel on its actions, despite the fact that he's also said that he is going to stand by Israel. The reason why I say this is that because I'm asking you, what do you make of his top picks? Pro-settlement Mike Huckabee, former Arkansas governor, and Stephen Witkoff as special envoy to the Middle East, which is West Asia. What do you make of these top picks?
Both of these individuals are Trump loyalists and at the same time are perceived as being very pro-Israel. Mike Huckabee is a very strong religious voice inside of the United States. In the past, he's been criticized for basically calling the U.S. to prioritize Christianity as a national religion, for which basically he was described as a Christianist who is looking for to establish theocratic norms in the U.S. But overall, his relationship with Israel has been very positive. The nominated envoy for the Middle East too is seen as both a pro-Israel voice and also he is a real estate magnate from the same circles as Trump. So there's a lot of business relations, and there's also a reflection of Trump's continuing approach to the Middle East as a transactional business arena, and the expansion of Abraham Accords and other regional deals as a sort of a business arrangement that can be resolved by having effective business people give back and forth and creating economic incentives for further cooperation. On the one hand, it's a sign that Trump is still hopeful about strengthening and expanding the Abraham Accord, but on the other hand, it raises questions whether this is the type of person who should be handling the complexity of political and military complications that have not been in place in 2017 through 2021 before Trump left office. It seems to be that Trump is still stuck a little bit in the past, on the past model. He thinks he can resolve all these issues by appointing people who are relatable to the economic interests of those countries, but there are clearly security issues that someone with a real estate background may not be quite as equipped to handle.
Right. Very interesting. You mentioned the Abraham Accord because that was going to be my next question. We saw the future of Abraham Accords really not moving forward, especially after the war. Do you think Trump will bring that back on track after his entire plan was waylaid, not just by the Biden administration, but particularly because of the Israel-Hamas war?
I think he will try very hard to do so. I think he can make some steps in at least resuming dialogue on some specific forms of cooperation and getting the players to the table. I think that is something he definitely can do with a team of dedicated players. But what he cannot do is single-handedly resolve all the issues that have occurred. He cannot return to the status quo easily. Um, the Gaza situation and the Lebanon situation require a long-term, consistent approach. There needs to be a political paradigm for restructuring Gaza, for governance, for putting an end not only to terrorism but to the political support and instrumentalization of these organizations. The growing role of Iran in West Bank and other areas outside its control, which is just as I said, just as political as it is military, and the internal dynamics inside those countries where other players seem to be playing a greater role, and their priority is no longer necessarily Abraham Accords or Israel. There are different now rivalries and competitions. Saudi Arabia and UAE, which at the peak of Abraham Accords, negotiations, were very close and were closely cooperating on many issues, have since become more competitors in various areas. Qatar, which has been seen as a major sponsor of Hamas and has been ideologically opposed to the Abraham Accords, despite having some relations with individual Israelis and even with the Israeli administration at various points, has been renormalized into the GCC and has played a significant security and economic role, and that has affected the outlook of those countries as well. Of course, Chinese, Russian, and Iranian influence on a political level can no longer be discounted, whereas during Trump's first term, China focused almost exclusively on building up economic relations and did not interfere into the political scene as much in the Middle East. Now it is a very vocal player, and it is a player openly aligning against Israel with Hamas, not with the Palestinian people, but with
Right.
Hamas.
Right. Again, very interesting. You spoke about Trump being transactional, and he has been so. So it is beneficial to him to end the war so that he can continue with his massive projects with the Arab world, which he cannot get through unless and until Israel stops its actions against people in Gaza. Having said that, do you think Trump has this opportunity right now, Irina, to become peacemaker, whether it's West Asia, what you call Middle East, or the Russia-Ukraine war, where he is going to force Russia and Ukraine to go back to the talking table?
I
And
think a lot.
if so, Irina, if I could just add, if so, he is one of those leaders who's been saying that he's not taken his country to war. He deserves a Nobel Peace Prize more than anyone else. Would he be able to manage, and should he be able to manage that? Are we looking at a major contender for the Nobel Peace Prize then?
Well, I think, one, it may be fair to say that Trump hasn't started those wars, but he certainly has to deal with them. I think he may try as hard as he can try to settle the conflicts. Ultimately, he can only introduce various forms of leverage and incentives. He cannot single-handedly force any countries to stop what they're doing, especially if they see it as a central part of the either geopolitical strategy or, on the other hand, existential or national security concern. Both wars, both Israel and Ukraine have received extraordinary levels of popular support for their defensive actions against against their attackers. So I don't think that the leaders of those countries are in any position to simply give over and and make the decisions to stop defense of their country single-handedly. I think they would immediately be replaced if that happened. At the end of the day, US has significant influence. It can deny aid, but that would weaken US image if it is seen as abandoning
True.
its allies, and it would also contribute to other security issues and actually make the situation worse. So I think Trump will be forced into confronting that reality. He has not been receiving national security briefings for procedural reasons in the US, and I think once he realizes what he's dealing with, I think it will be difficult for him to simply claim that he can resolve those issues overnight as he has in the past. I think a lot will also depend on who he listens to within his administration. Right now, we are seeing a mix of conflicting voices, some of the traditional grand strategies and anti-Russia, anti-China, anti-Iranian hawks in key positions are also supplemented by the likes of Elon Musk, who does not have an official position in geopolitical areas, but who nevertheless is very close to Trump and has his ear at the moment.
Yes.
J.D. Vance, his vice president, may not be as influential in everyday matter, but he has been highly effective in galvanizing support, and he is backed by Tucker Carlson, who is an isolationist, who's been very openly pro-Russia and anti-Israel and anti-Ukraine, not merely in the sense of looking for peace, but actively antagonizing against both of them, and even praising China in more recent months. And that is someone that, for now, also has a very close relationship with Trump and has in fact selected and recommended some of the top contenders, including the vice president elect. So these conflicting influences are going to clash, and Trump's own sons, by the way, belong to that second camp, the Tucker Carlson camp, not the Marco Rubio and others camp. So we will see what will happen. Trump has selected officials he believes will follow his agenda and will implement effectively his view, but he also is known for replacing people very quickly, especially when they disagree with him. And we can expect this clash of polarized factions within the Republican Party, and I think the reality will force some sort of a compromise of these hardcore moves, because once you get to office, it's very different from when you are campaigning and you tell people what they want to hear. Everybody wants to stop wars. Nobody wants to continue wars unless you're an actual aggressor. So this sort of message has been welcomed by Americans of all backgrounds, which helped Trump win the elections. But will he have an actual strategy for doing so? That much is unclear. What is clear is that he does have more clout than the Biden administration, having had positive
I was
relations.
just going to ask you that, Irina. I was just going to ask you that does he have more influence than the Biden administration, and will he be able to wield more influence in the wars that are now ongoing, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, or Israel, Hamas, than the Biden administration? Because it did seem like Biden administration was almost helpless. They kept asking countries to do things, and nobody was really paying heed. Do you think Trump will be heard more?
I think in some ways that's already happening, because we see Europeans, including Norway, galvanizing in response to their concerns about Trump and his actions towards Ukraine and NATO in getting more aid out more quickly. So if that dynamic continues, it would be positive. And if these countries also use this opportunity to raise their defense spending, that would be positive for everyone. There's only so much US can do financially. I think NATO is an incredibly important alliance. I think Trump will be hard pressed to withdraw from it, but he can certainly threaten to reduce spending, to be less of assistance, and that will not serve any of these parties well. So I do think that in the sense they see him as a potential threat that could make them do more things, at least initially. With respect to other countries, part of the problem with the Biden administration is that they were not bringing anything to the table when they were
Right.
begging all these countries for assistance. They went around insulting and attacking countries with political and government differences. They focused excessively on democracy and human rights without, by the way, enforcing human rights in some of the worst human rights offending states in any significant way, and ignoring them. And these double standards cost them a lot of credibility. And I think countries are very willing to cooperate on all levels, including these processes with human rights concerns. But they need to see that it's a relationship, not the U.S. Patronizing and telling everyone what to do. We are no longer living in a bipolar world where countries are simply kind of stuck. They make financial deals with a variety of players. Yes,
Right.
we are bipolar in the sense that there is, a China pro-authoritarian vision and a US-led vision of democracies, capitalism, cooperation, and partnership. But then US has to actually play to that vision and have something to offer and have a meaningful engagement, and not merely random self-selected processes of that has not have not served the Biden administration well. They just managed to ruin a lot of very positive dynamic in many cases.
Right. Irina Tsukerman, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global. Thank you.